Hi, I'm Jonathan Treussard, and welcome to Treussard Talks, where we talk about the mechanics of investing, the psychology of investing, and what it means to manage your wealth with purpose. Because understanding your wealth shouldn't be as complex as building it. Welcome to today's show. Devin Shanthikumar, I am so excited to talk to you today. I want to get into both your life story and your research work. But before I do, let me do a very quick intro. You got your undergrad degree at UC Berkeley in engineering and computer science. You ended up drifting into a PhD in finance at Stanford. You taught at HBS, and you are now faculty at University of California, Irvine, and an associate dean responsible for undergraduate studies at the business school at Merage. You've done some really interesting research work in terms of thinking about the psychology of markets, the technology of markets, and of course, incentives in the industry. You've got some really cool, interesting work with someone I really admire and think is a fabulous human being, Ulrike Malmendier, who's currently the president of the American Finance Association. And your current focus, something that we've talked about briefly socially, is really thinking about the application of AI to security analysis and really to the apparatus of finance more generally. So I want to talk about all of that. But before we do, let's start at the top. Tell me where you grew up and how you ended up going to Berkeley and Stanford and everything that's happened since.
All right. Well, thank you for that introduction, Jonathan. I appreciate it. All right. So how did this all start? I'm very much sort of an American dream story. My parents are immigrants and they came to the US when I was just a few months old. And my dad is a professor. He's an academic. So I got to see what he was doing, and I thought it looked like the most amazing thing in the world because he was asking questions all the time. He was learning new things. And I thought teaching was fun because I loved teaching my little brothers. And obviously, if I could teach my little brothers, I must be able to do it. So from a very young age, I just thought the idea of academia was exciting, but I had no specific topic or field that stood out to me. I was someone who was interested in everything. So in high school, I did speech and debate and mock trial and math and science and you name it, I was interested in it. So when I went to UC Berkeley, I did largely grow up in California. We settled there after moving to a few different places. UC Berkeley was a natural choice. I thought, okay, engineering's hard. Let's start with the hard one. And so I started with that, but I still took classes in everything. And so I reached a point where I thought, I'm still interested in everything. I'm interested in the math and the science, but I'm interested in humans. And I felt like business brought that together, right? And so that's how I ended up doing my PhD in finance.
I love that. I mean, that's the way I feel about finance in general. I think of economics as a way to organize your thinking, but I think of finance as really the intersection of mechanics and psychology. So you're now at Stanford and you're pursuing finance. What was your work on as a graduate student?
So as a graduate student, I think this is going to be true of every researcher, but it's definitely true of my work. The questions that I ask are inspired by my experiences and what I'm seeing around me, the people I'm talking to, the things that are happening in the world. This was the early 2000s in the Bay Area. You had the dot-com boom, and I was an electrical engineering computer science student at the time, and tons of people getting very excited about investing in these new companies. And then you had the bust. And a lot of people lost a lot of money, sometimes money they didn't even have because they had invested on margin and they just didn't understand what they were doing. I was interested in what are these mistakes that people are making and why are they making them? And these were smart people. These are people who are cutting edge of technology, but they didn't understand finance and financial markets. So my work automatically became a little bit behavioral finance. It was essentially, what are these mistakes that people are making and why? Ulrike Malmendier joined Stanford when I was partway through my PhD, and my dissertation advisor at the time, Ming Wang, said, I keep hearing the same ideas from you and from this new professor who joined. We need to introduce you two to each other. And so that's how Ulrike and I met, and we instantly hit it off. She became my co-advisor, and we worked together. I had a couple of solo authored papers and some joint work with her while I was at Stanford.
It's funny you say that about smart people making kind of terrible mistakes, right? Painful mistakes, because it's not a matter of intelligence. Sometimes it's not even a matter of training. It's just the nature of markets, of psychology, and honestly, not truly understanding incentives. Financial services, financial markets really are, in a lot of ways, fundamental functions of how we organize ourselves as a society, but they're also a business. And so it's really helpful to understand that. So I get that business was always at the core of what you were curious about. You're now concluding your doctorate studies and you have some decisions to make. Tell me about how you ended up going to HBS.
Yeah, so a lot of people don't expect this, but the research I do about investor behavior, the mistakes that investors make, the types of information they get and use, it turns out a lot of accounting faculty, accounting researchers do that type of work. I didn't expect that. I thought accounting was just adding and subtracting. And now that I look back at it, that was obviously naive. But what I had discovered while I was at Stanford is that my research fell in this huge overlap space between accounting research and finance research. So I actually went on the job market in both, and I got offers in both. But Harvard in particular made me this just incredible offer of a 1-year postdoc in accounting, where I'd get to do an executive education program as a student with the types of executives who do a Harvard Business School executive program. I'd get to learn how to teach the Harvard case method. I'd get to do all this stuff, a lot of really cool learning, and become a professor there. And so I obviously accepted that offer, and they really invested in me, and I learned an incredible amount during my time there.
I'm not surprised. I have good friends who kind of made the same decision you did of joining HBS, knowing that it was always going to be a richer experience in certain ways, even if it ultimately led to making transition decisions and, in your case, coming back to California, which is pretty cool. But yeah, I think teaching at HBS, being in that environment for a number of years is truly irreplaceable, whether you're a student or faculty, which I think people don't fully appreciate. One of the things that I think is really cool about the work you've done is there's a specific body of work. You published a piece in 2007 on basically whether small investors are naive to incentives among security analysts, sell-side analysts in particular. You then published a piece in the RFS in 2014 on whether security analysts kind of speak in two tongues, as you put it, whether they actually try to split the difference between the headline recommendations they make and some of the projections they make. And then finally, I think the article that really brings it all together is a more recent article, 2022, on brokerage and trading volume. And at that point, you really put it together recognizing that brokerage houses run businesses. They happen to hire people that are security analysts, sell-side analysts to produce reports. But it's not public service. It's in the service of their business, which is not a bad thing. It's just the nature of running any particular for-profit entity.
I'll go with the bigger context first. And you described the research really well. But I'd say if you think about the bigger context, obviously what analysts are doing, they are part of a business and they need to be contributing to that business. But connecting it back to what I described of my work at Stanford, the key was that people were using these analyst recommendations and forecasts and what they were seeing without understanding that. And so the first thing that I did, going back chronologically in terms of the work, was, well, what are the mistakes that investors are making due to their lack of that understanding, not understanding the business? And the simplest one back then was recommendations were mostly buy and strong buy, right? There was a little bit of hold, and hold meant it was really pretty negative. But officially, they had these categories of sell and strong sell, which no one ever used.
It's like great inflation in academia.
Exactly. And investors just took it literally. Retail investors, individual investors, right? Sophisticated investors, professional investors, all knew better and all shifted it down. We all knew that a hold meant sell. It was not a good thing. But your average super smart, potentially, but not necessarily informed about the industry investor saw that hold and held and saw buy and bought. And so that was the first work that we did in that space. That means that when you think about the overall industry and the incentives that analysts face, they really have a lot of competing pressures, right? They need to contribute to the business through generating trading. They need to contribute through high value research for the big clients. They are also contributing to generating trading and kind of bringing in these smaller investors, right? People like my own family, right? The ones who maybe became professionals, they're working their way up and now they have some money to invest for the first time. Those are still important to the overall business, but they're all very different audiences. And the analysts are also, it's a very important audience for them, the companies themselves, because they need to be able to get in and talk to management. And so you can't really do that if, you just publish something really, really horrible about the company.
Yeah, you need access.
You need access. And so the paper about two tongues was really, let's hone in on just two specific but very visible pieces of what analysts publish, the recommendations and the earnings forecasts. And when we look at those, the incentives are very different. The earnings forecast in particular, ultimately, you want it to be close to the actual earnings number. You want it to be accurate. But if you're going to make a mistake, that mistake being that you were slightly too low and the company was able to beat that earnings number is probably a better mistake to make than you made it too high. The recommendation, most people can buy stock. A lot of people can't sell. Not as many investors short sell. And because of that, you tend to want to publish more of this positive recommendation research. So with these different incentives, do we see the analysts actually communicating in different ways?
That's really interesting. And I think you're right to understand that you have different constituencies and different incentives. Access to management is a very real, important deal for the analyst community. And in its best form, it actually can become somewhat symbiotic, where the companies learn from having their businesses being reviewed in the town square, if you will. I mean, one of the reasons academics publish research, one of the most reasons behind actually sharing what you think is because it can actually be a virtuous conversation. The other thing, and I don't think this is in the paper, but I just think understanding that analysts are people, they have a sense of self-image. And so as much as you might bend to the incentives that surround you, do you think that kind of creating that dual pathway is also a way for them to preserve, in a weird way, their self-image as not as biased and perhaps more objective, that sort of thing? Is it a way to kind of thread that needle psychologically for them?
That's a good question. It's not in the research, right? This is not something that we explicitly examine. I've talked to a lot of analysts about these issues, right? And it's one of those things where when I talk to analysts about it, many of them, the reaction is something along the lines of, oh yeah, that makes sense. But at the same time, I don't do that. Right? And so I don't think it's something that anyone is consciously going and saying, oh, I'm going to speak in two tongues. No, I'm going to serve my clients. And I am going to publish the best research I possibly can. But that's challenging, right? How do I serve this diverse set of clients? I also want to emphasize there's still more information coming in, right? The fact that these analysts are existing and are engaging with managers and they're asking questions on conference calls and they're doing all of this improves the information environment. It's even better if the investors understand the dynamics and know how to use the resulting research in the right ways.
It's a little bit like putting the right label on the right medication.
Yeah, and actually, I mean, it's interesting that you just probably by coincidence mentioned medicine. In the current environment, investors have more and more sources of analysis and information that they can use, right? Any investor, whether it's a retail individual investor or a professional investor, I think trust is going to be a huge factor. And we can see what's happening in the medical space due to lack of trust. I think it's important that we recognize these potential issues and are very open and communicative about what the research means to try and keep that trust.
I think that's absolutely correct. It's one of those things where knowledge, it can be a curse. Once you identify things like incentives and the fact that everybody's running a business, then it's very easy to become cynical. It's very easy to say, well, these guys are conflicted, therefore I'm not going to listen to them. And you can quickly find yourself in the quagmire of, I love this word, finfluencers. I mean, what is a finfluencer? It's someone with a social media account, right? And, well, the argument could be these people are independent. Isn't that good? But of course, they have their own incentives, never mind the fact that they don't have the guardrails of operating, quote unquote, within the establishment. So it's one of those things where, out of the frying pan and into the fire may not necessarily always work out as intended. How do you think about the fact that today we live perhaps in a more disintermediated world from that standpoint?
I think there are a lot of potential benefits in getting broader participation, viewpoints from more people. There's this wisdom of the crowds idea. And there's research to show that social media analysts do provide value, right? In terms of once you aggregate across all of them, there's some information there. The challenge is definitely in people not understanding the incentives and the system. Also, what I worry about is sort of echo chambers, that people are choosing who to follow based on what they want to hear. And then it exacerbates those potential mistakes that they're going to make. I actually have a working paper right now where we're looking at that basic issue.
I mean, it's really interesting, right? Because you can self-select into Wall Street bets and have the GameStop experience, and I guess this is very topical over the last couple of weeks here at the end of 2025, Michael Burry just basically decided he's not going to be running a hedge fund anymore. What he's going to be doing is publishing a newsletter instead. And my understanding is he's doing very, very well with subscribers. And so he might have just replaced, $1 million income from running money to running a newsletter. And again, the people that will self-select into reading Michael Burry of Too Big to Fail fame may have their own biases that will just be reaffirmed, right? But except in that case, you might be paying hundreds of dollars a year to have your biases reaffirmed, as opposed to implicitly being advertised at.
Yes.
Thanks for listening. I'm Jonathan Treussard, founder of Treussard Capital Management. I hope you're enjoying this episode. If you'd like to start receiving my free newsletter, Wealth Empowered, or if you'd like to learn more about me and Treussard Capital Management, go to Treussard.com. That's TREUSSARD.com. Thanks, and enjoy the rest of the episode.
Well, in that working paper I mentioned, we looked at Seeking Alpha and we looked sort of engagement in the comments section when you have these Seeking Alpha articles. And we actually found that as users discuss with each other, they become more moderate. They actually start to agree with each other more. And they start to incorporate other people's viewpoints. So it's still possible, right? Social media can help us to see diverse viewpoints, but you have to choose to actually look at all of those.
That's truly hopeful because, again, that's not the baseline behavior online. So that's great that people are actually kind of hearing each other and learning from each other. I obviously, as an academic person, and I used to work at Research Affiliates, and we talked a lot about sharing our views. And I do the same. Of course, I write my newsletter and do these conversations with people I respect. And a huge amount of it is like, hey, if you put out what you think and you're open to feedback, that becomes a source of strength. It just happens to require being open to that last little bit, which is the feedback, right? So you think there is a public forum and a public market for something that feels like best-in-class investment discussions as opposed to just entertainment?
I do. Yeah, but I am, just full disclosure, I am an optimist. But I like to think that I'm a realistic optimist. And if nothing else, we've found research evidence for it. And Seeking Alpha is one of the biggest investment forums, social media forums for investors. We honestly went into this project expecting the exact opposite. And so it was really heartening to find what we found. And we spent a lot of time really digging into it. Is this true? Are we actually finding what we're finding? And sure enough, any way you cut it, that engagement was actually helping to kind of moderate people.
I love when that happens, when you're actually learning as opposed to confirming your basic expectation. All right. So obviously you have this incredible background, both academic pedigree and just the breadth of engineering and finance and accounting and all of that. You've been thinking a lot about the intersection of technology and markets and, AI being kind of the new thing. Not so new. I guess we're 3 years into the official AI revolution. So where are you pushing on this conversation about AI and security analysis and what it means for the future of investing, I guess?
So right now, in terms of my research, I'm looking at how AI is impacting analyst research. And there's two main reasons I'm looking at this. One, analysts themselves are just so important. They still do, despite all these diverse options that people have, the analyst research itself still has a huge impact on the market. And so I want to understand how it's impacting them and the work that they're doing. It's also an incredible laboratory to really understand the potential effects of AI, because there's very few jobs where the output of what you do is so clearly measurable and public. You have these ex post realizations, something like an earnings that actually happens. And, on a quarterly basis or an annual basis, you can kind of evaluate how well did the person do. There's very few settings like that. And so I'm interested in it both because analysts matter, but also because I think the lessons of what we see are happening there can inform all of us on how AI can potentially impact our jobs.
Yeah, I mean, that's the challenge of it all, right? Which is, I had a former boss who had started his career on the sell side, and he used to joke that the name of the game was give him a number or give him a date, but don't give him both. And of course, that's not how that works. So you're right. This is one of those things where fundamentally you have the ability to run analysis and get some proper conclusions. Do you have any sense of what you're seeing right now in the very early stages of this research? Is AI making analysts more correct, more conservative, more, I guess there are so many ways to finish that sentence.
So first of all, let me just say that we define AI pretty broadly. So we're not just looking at Gen AI. We're looking at machine learning, sentiment analysis, data analytics that are using AI, that sort of thing. So when broadly defined, what you find is that AI is improving analyst research. That's the bottom line. And it's improving the human analysts' research. This isn't just, there's this AI analyst that's good. No, this is about what the human analysts are doing. So they become more accurate. They're able to update their forecasts faster after something like an earnings announcement or a big information event. They can process more complex filings more accurately and faster. All of that is really, I think, about how the AI helps to facilitate the work of an analyst, right? But the other piece that we find that I think is really exciting is that the AI allows the analyst to do more of the human work, right? We see analysts becoming better, particularly for companies where private information is more important, companies where it's harder to forecast, where an automated forecast is probably going to do worse. That's actually where the analysts improve the most. And so really the AI is allowing them to do more of that human part. And in particular, they're actually being bolder. So that part we didn't necessarily expect. If you're automating and everyone's using AI the same way, you might expect everyone to converge.
Right.
But we actually find increasing boldness.
Interesting. So it actually allows you, it frees you to explore, spend more time on where the human is irreplaceable, and it doesn't drive to this kind of forced consensus necessarily, which I guess is, again, very hopeful. I love this conversation. Every turn of this conversation, I feel slightly more optimistic about the future. This is good.
Yes. And I'm hoping I can talk to more analysts about what they're seeing with AI use, because I've been able to talk to a few, but it's definitely been a little bit hard to get the inside scoop on what's happening. And I think that's going to help our research so much to be able to shed light on what's really happening.
Yeah, and I think your early messages are very helpful in this regard, because again, if the basic premise is one of fear of, is this thing coming for my job? Then that's going to be one very visceral reaction to talking about this technology. I talk about excellence that is hugely human. If the excellence becomes kind of part of the baseline because you have all these tools, you can actually lean into the humanity of your own skill set and of what's required of the situation. So that makes a lot of sense to me. You're not just a researcher. Obviously, you're an educator and in administration at a leading public university. Needless to say, technology, among many other societal forces, is causing higher education to think about its own future. So how do you think about teaching and learning in the age of AI?
That's a great question. I will say throughout my career, my training in both technology, psychology, and financial markets, having all three of those, has always been extremely valuable to me. But I feel like right now, that's even more important. So first of all, UC Irvine, Paul Merage School of Business, we're clearly very technologically forward, right? We've always been, and it's part of our DNA. We hire faculty who do research that's at the cutting edge of technology and business. It's in our coursework as we teach. But that still doesn't mean that we know exactly what to do with AI. But this is big and moving fast, and it does require some real thought on what to do. So I'll say what we're doing right now in the undergraduate space. What we're doing is we're really integrating the AI-related learning throughout the program. We don't have a single AI course. There's a course on AI ethics. Like there's a couple of electives that are related, machine learning, and we have things like that. But it's not a come learn how to write prompts. But throughout our program, we know that our students need foundational knowledge, because if you don't have foundational knowledge, you can't actually use these tools well. You don't know when they're giving you garbage and when they're giving you something that's actually valuable. We are helping the students to understand why they need the foundational knowledge. So we're actually training them in the concept of learning, critical thinking, right? What does it really mean to build yourself into someone who can add value versus the AIs? But also, how do you use it in a smart way? For example, I teach accounting. In my course, we don't do a ton with it because it's an introductory level course, but I teach the students how you can use it to help identify examples and use cases, and then go to those other sources to read more, how you can use it to help test your own understanding, right? To use it as a learning partner. And we have other courses, like a negotiations course, that uses it to teach the students how you can use it as a negotiation partner to prepare for a real world negotiation. We have a new ventures course that shows you how you can use it to help you build your business case. But you still need to actually have ideas if you want to be a successful entrepreneur. So that's kind of the approach that we're taking. We don't want to give up the foundational knowledge, but we do want our students to be smart users.
And you need the foundational knowledge. I mean, I think that's one of those things where, presumably you and I have a comparable background in terms of coding and that sort of thing. One of the things about coding is debugging. It's not, the code isn't the code is step one. And knowing what the answer ought to be and what silliness looks like, I'm reminded of the power of graphing. When you're coding and you're producing output and you're looking at, this plot and that plot along the way. I remember having a conversation with someone who was very quantitatively smart, but not a finance person. And they were putting together a database. And they were so happy that they had put together this database until we plotted market capitalization for a handful of firms, and they all came back as flat lines. And I was like, hey, just so you That's not, I can tell you living in the real world, company values bounce up and down. Flat lines tells me there's something going on that isn't working. And so I think that's exactly right, which is the diagnostic is really critical.
That's our biggest worry, right? Is our students they're incredibly strong students, right? Our acceptance rate is below 10%. Like we're getting the best. What if we can't even find jobs for students of this caliber? That to me is a huge worry. I can tell you that every time I'm talking to an employer, I'm asking them about what they're looking for and what is their hiring situation and what are they thinking. It is just a reality that entry-level jobs have reduced. I'm hoping that what we're training them with, kind of these critical thinking skills, the communication skills, the mix of foundational knowledge and the ability to use AI is going to make them competitive in that more competitive market. But it's going to be a challenge for all of us. And I definitely worry about, and I'm sure a lot of us do, 5 years down the road, when we didn't have all those entry-level people getting that experience, what does that mean for the next level up?
Yeah. It's hard to immediately jump to the optimistic answer because I think the societal impact, we're still kind of working our way through that.
I'm going to say one other piece that's pretty different. It might not be what you expect, but another huge piece of what we're doing here at Merage is just building community, is helping the students to see the value in other people and supporting each other and having that support and having community. Because I think the other thing I worry about in the AI world, you've probably seen some of the numbers, like I think it's something like 60% of K through 12 students see AI as a friend. I worry about losing that human connection. Even in our online courses, human connection is a huge part of it. And just in general, in terms of our program and how we're building things, we want students who value that human connection.
I think that's irreplaceable. And again, there are a lot of kind of cheap replacements. You get into an elevator, the doors close, everybody pulls out their phone. And not that I necessarily want to make small talk with every person I ever take an elevator with, but I think there is something to leaning into the human aspect because it's the only real thing we have, right? I was talking to someone I respect, and she said she went to a conference and she was shocked at the luncheon. Most everybody sat around these ridiculous round ballroom tables and no one talked to one another. They were all on their phones. And you're a little bit like, hey, why did you fly all this way to be in a, pretty depressing room to start with? And then cut out the one thing that this is supposed to bring, which is community. It's tough. And look, you and I met at a mixer, right? At a faculty mixer type of thing. Because again, there's nothing like meeting other people engaged in your space. I think that's very important. This was an incredible conversation. You shared that you're the daughter of immigrants. I'm an immigrant. I grew up in Paris. And throughout my youth, I was bathed in French TV and French culture. And there was one TV show hosted by Bernard Pivot. It was a literary show talking about books. How French is that? And he would ask all of his guests a series of questions. The same series of questions was adapted to American TV by James Lipton for Inside the Actor's Studio TV show. So on the way out, I would love to ask you a short series of questions, and you can take them as literally or be as interpretive as you see fit. Are you ready?
All right. Good.
What is your favorite word?
Yes.
What is your least favorite word?
No.
What is your favorite drug?
I'm outdoors. The sunshine.
Sunshine is a pretty solid stimulant.
Yeah.
I guess that's why we all moved back to California at some point. What is a sound you love?
I love the sound of running water, ocean waves, babbling brook, anything like that.
What is a sound you hate?
Ooh. I do a lot of public speaking and that feedback, microphone, speaker. Ugh.
And as an engineering, you know the solution. So you're like, just fix it. What is your favorite curse word?
Ooh, I guess it's the S word because it typically comes into my head while driving.
Got it. Who would you like to see on a new banknote?
Ruth Bader Ginsburg. That'd be a good one.
I agree. What is a profession other than your own that you would never, ever want to attempt?
Pediatrician. I really appreciate them, but that looks hard.
If you're reincarnated as a plant or an animal, what do you hope it would be?
Butterfly.
Okay, one last question. If God exists, what would you like to hear them say when you get to the pearly gates?
Good job.
Thank you, Devin, for joining us.
Thank you, Jonathan.
As I said,
this was a lot of fun.
Absolutely. And I can't wait for the incoming research.
Thank you.
This podcast is for entertainment and education only. Nothing here is financial advice. Treussard Capital Management is a registered investment advisor. Please visit our website, treussard.com, for additional information and disclaimers.